I'm assuming you are wanting to do a presentation. Or you are going to be doing one. Whether you want to do one or not might be a different story.
Well, I could just let y'all talk up there. But generally, there's some structures helpful at times. What I've prepared here is the same slide deck that we saw a few weeks ago, but I've added some things to the slide deck, and there's been a meeting internally where there was a request to put in one of the revenue options to see what it looked like and how it impacted fund balance. The agenda bill, the revised agenda bill's in front of you on the dais there, and there's 4 bullets on there, slides that were added. I did find that I had one slide duplicated in here throughout. I guess I really wanted to drive that point home. And we can just start by going through this again, and quickly or as slowly as we want, depending on your questions.
And so if you have questions during Shelley's presentation, just raise your hand and we'll accommodate those questions.
So again, we're going to discuss the budget deficit that is driven by lower revenue projections and higher expenditures. We're going to look at the 6-year forecast for revenue trends, expenditure trends, and fund balance. The current revenues increased with council action, the current revenues requiring voter approval, new revenue options via council authority or approval, or whether they need to be voted. Again, the levy lid primer is in here again, as well as a B&O tax primer. As a reminder, the actions taken to balance this 2-year budget that we're in, 2019 and 2020, sales tax dollars that were normally earmarked for the local street program are being retained in the general fund. The local street program is being funded with real estate excise tax. That's a limited revenue source that we've put into place for the 2 years to maintain that funding with real estate excise tax would not be sustainable. The contra expenditure accounts for staff attrition were utilized to recognize unused budget, which means we reduced both the 2019 and 2020 expenditure budgets by a total of $3.5 million. We also have a $4 million transfer out of cumulative reserve in 2020. This is a new slide, what is causing the budget deficit. This was discussed in the agenda bill on January 28th, but we did not have a slide in here to highlight these items. You are all familiar with the streamlined sales tax mitigation and the sunset of that program in 2019. There are ongoing legislative efforts that you're most likely aware of to not replace the streamlined sales tax or continue the program, but to look at it from a different aspect, where I look at the cities that promote warehousing and transportation facilities for storing of these materials, look at the benefit that they provide the state and get a sales tax credit based upon the percentage of space that each city has. And this would be all the cities in the valley from Fife clear around to Tukwila or Renton also. They do have some storage facilities there. So it's the whole port-to-port valley. Also, the property tax cap is at 1%. 30% of the general fund revenue is funded with property tax. A 1% of general fund or property tax left is $220,000 or thereabouts a year. That's not a lot of money a year given our benefit. Just our health care alone is increasing $1 million plus a year, the cost for that. So again, labor and benefits are growing at a greater rate than current inflation, which is currently at 2.8% from 2017 to 2018, December to December. Our public safety contracts, and what I mean by those, I'm talking about SCORE, our jailing, and Valleycom 911 call center. For several years, those, well, not SCORE, but SCORE has increased greater than 10% in these particular budget years. And Valleycom has been historically, over the last 5 or 6 years, increasing at double digits, anywhere from the range of 10 to 15% a year. It's currently at $3.4 million approximately in the 2019 budget. And the SCORE contract is $5 million in the 2019 budget. When you add those together, it's about $8.4 million, and that's 10% of our general fund budget for those two contracts. It's something to think about. Again, we have increasing programs and costs surrounding our homelessness services. We have a young police force, and salaries are increasing, not just at COLA in any contract that may be negotiated, but step increases are generally 2.5% a year on top of any COLA that is provided. So we are anticipating average increases about 5.5% a year just for the police force.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Shelley, what is the cost for the homeless programs? What are we spending on that?
Well,
So we added 500,000. You as council approved an additional 500,000 in the budget each of the next 2 years solely for the shelter services, for encampment cleanups and other items that are related to homelessness, but also your general fund dollars that you do for human services, as well as some of your HUD funding.
Okay.
So I believe that information has been given.
I believe that Director Hinman has provided that information.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, could you answer how much we put into the human services?
What?
Director.
Homeless, okay, the additional in the contract is for just the homelessness services.
Okay.
Human services, if we take that as a whole, which is now under Director Tate's purview, includes many programs, and we'd have to sit down and look at that budget, but it's significant. I'm trying to think, 1.3 million for all those services, salaries and benefits and.
Yeah, if you take, there are actually 4 different budgets that make up human and community services, and that's probably pretty close, 1.3, 1.4 million for the programs.
Okay.
For all 4 areas.
But
Yeah.
it's not all related to homelessness, but
Right.
there's
Right.
domestic violence
Right.
and health and, yeah.
Okay.
There's human services, there's homeless services.
Okay, thank you very much.
And homeless does fall under human services. It's a component. Okay, and medical benefits. In our contract, our medical contract and provider for everyone except for the Teamsters, that increased 10% from 2018 to 2019. So that's a summary of some of the larger driving factors of why our expenditures are growing. And our revenues are actually decreasing. And here, as you can see again, is the general fund revenue forecast for 6-year forecast from 2019 to 2024. And the revenues grow about $4 million over those 6 years, from 72.1 to 75.1. In 2020, there's the $4 million transfer in, which is kind of a one-time shot that bring the revenues in 2020 up to 75 million. But over 6 years, $4 million revenue growth. Our costs are increasing greater than that. This is just a graph of that chart you saw previously on the previous. And then our expenditures here, as you can see, are growing over the same time period. And here's where the $3.5 million, $1.5 million in 2019 and $2 million in 2020 have are just reducing the overall budget for salary and benefit attrition from positions turning and rolling. And you can see that our expenditures by 2024 estimated to be about $92.5 million against $75 million in revenue. We have also taken into account down here under the unused residual budget of $4.5 million every year. That's unspent budget. Some of that could be from salary attrition. Some of it can be for things that ended up not happening. The program's is going to be carried forward, or things just didn't cost as much. We do have things in the non-departmental budget for our LEF liability to pay for those LEF benefits, which is the local law enforcement, firefighter, medical for life costs. And also we put in there expected retirements. We do have some contingency funds in there, and maybe we don't spend the contingency funds. But we account for that down here in this $4.5 million every year from 2020 on. Again, we did not account for it in 2019 because we have this $3.5 million here, where we kind of accounted for most of it. So we didn't want to double count that. As you can see, by the end of 2024, we're looking at about a $30.5 million fund balance deficit under this current scenario that we're operating. Things can happen to change this, but this is good information for decision making. This is our expenditures marching up. And our fund balance, this is a graph of the fund balance that we just talked about. The revenues are in green. The blue bar is our expenditures. It's a summary of those charts we just saw. And this again, I put this as a duplicate slide. I guess I really wanted to drive these points home. We won't go over these again, but I wanted to then also talk about what revenues can be increased without a vote, and what council is allowed to do, and what the cap, or if there's a cap or no cap. And also into the comment section here, it discusses where these taxes go. And currently there's 7% utility tax charged on all the city-owned utilities. 1% goes into the arterial street preservation fund, and 6% goes into general fund. So here's the amount of revenue that these would generate. Now, a question was asked, what would it look like if all the city-owned utilities taxes were increased 2%? And looking at 25 years, 2020 through 2024, that would be almost $7 million that would be infused into the general fund over this time period. And here's the impact of this almost $7 million on ending fund balance out. And this slide isn't in your deck, paper deck that I gave you. I put this in just before I came in here tonight because I wanted to show you the impact and the overall impact of that 2% tax in 2024 on the ending fund balance. Again, here are revenues with voter approval. And what I've also referenced the revenue manual page on these. There's a revenue manual. You can access it online under the fiscal reports. I believe there's one in your council library. And if you have any questions about the revenues that the city has available and levies, you have all the detail and the history of those revenue streams in that book. And again, the telephone tax revenue stream is declining year over year due to wireless phones, and the landlines are becoming dinosaurs. But there's still landline activity out there. Okay, these are also some revenue options, again, that are outside of the ones we just discussed. And there's a public safety sales tax. It's a 50+1 vote to pass. And a 0.1% levy on sales tax for public safety purposes. I would like to note that any auto sales are exempt from this tax. Would bring about $1.4 million annually. A business occupation tax, there's various types, $5 million+ a year. Levy lid left, the B&O tax, the business and occupation, is councilmanic only, there's no vote. A levy lid left is supermajority, not supermajority, it's simple majority, 50% +1. And 1% again on the property tax, like we are held to right now under state law. The 1% increase is about $220,000. Excess levies are for capital purposes only, and those are supermajority, where 60% need to approve, and it's for the levying the property tax to service the debt, the principal and interest on any debt that would be issued for the capital purpose.
Okay. So, oh, I thought the deputy mayor had a question, but he's got it figured out, so.
Again, there's two types of levy lid lifts, and they're both voted. There's a single year left and a multi-year left, or you may, and they're both of them may exceed the 1% annual limit. The first year is a dollar amount. It's just, it can be, we want to increase it by 500,000. The first year is the dollar amount, gets levied, and then there's an increase every year. Every year in the multi-year left would be an increase every year tied to some index or just some percentage rate. Under the single year left, it's one time, and it can be used for any purpose, as long as we don't exceed the millage rate per thousand, the dollar rate per thousand. This is what a 1 year permanent, or temporary, I'm sorry, 1 year temporary. So say that this is 500,000, it's exceeding the 1% limit by a little, about 2%, maybe a little bit more than 2%, and then it increases at some percentage rate until such a time it goes back to what it would have been had there been no levy lid left. So, oh, I'm sorry, this is just the 1% each year on top. Say that this was $500,000, then everything's increased 1% a year, and then it goes down. This is a temporary single year levy lid left. A permanent levy, you show it goes up, say this is your 500,000, which is above the 1%, and then this is 1% each year. It doesn't sunset, it keeps going. Multi-year left, we do a voted 6-year levy lid left. The first year is a fixed dollar amount again. And generally, the increases every year are tied to some sort of index. You're not limited to the 1%. And it, again, may be permanent or temporary. This is a temporary. And so it's going up more than the 1% a year by whatever index. And the first year is that dollar amount. And then it sunsets and it goes back down to what it would have been had there been no levy lid left. And the permanent one, it continues on. And after the 6-year increases, you can see that these are bigger increases than the 1%. And then at the end, it goes down to the 1% again. I hope that makes sense. I know these levy lid lifts are not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of technicality to them. Again, business and occupation taxes. There's 44 cities that levy these. Must use the model B&O tax model ordinance, which contains certain mandatory provisions intended to provide uniform methodology. If you have a business that's doing business in many jurisdictions that levy a business and occupation tax, it talks about how to apportion, the apportionment of those taxes. So one city can't claim all the all the B&O tax if they're doing business in another B&O tax jurisdiction. Only the business within their city limits or the boundaries. Taxes are generally levied on gross receipts of the business entities up to 0.2%. There are some cities that are over the 0.2%, but they're grandfathered in. And I think there's some explanation on that in the detail I provided to you. Common tax categories are retail, manufacturing, services, and wholesale. These are common, but that doesn't mean that that's all there is. It's open to whatever, whatever category we would want to establish. Tax rates can vary between the different categories, but they must be applied uniformly within the category.
Deputy Mayor Pelosi.
Shelley, the first bullet or arrow, 44 cities out of 281, is that correct?
I'm not sure how many cities there are.
I'm talking about the cities within the state.
State, correct. Okay, so 281. I knew there's about 300.
281. Yeah, I was saying
Yeah.
281.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Again, the city's not restricted on any basis. You could use, there's some out there that do it on square footage. There's some that do it on FTE or full-time equivalent employees, known as a head tax. They can do it on any other tax calculated on a basis other than gross receipts. Lead time for an implementation of this type of legislation would be no less than 9 to 12 months, 12 months preferably, given the complexity of putting something like this in place. Estimated revenue from a 0.2% tax rate is $6.6 million. Estimated revenue from square footage tax would be approximately $225,000 based on 0.01 per square foot. Revenue on 10% would be $2.5 million, or it'd be 2.25. I got the typo in there, and so on. And here is here's the totals at 1%. We took a reduction, and we have a listing of what we think the square footage is on each one of these, and we took it at a 90% rate in case there's an error in the report or there's something there that wouldn't flow through, so I wanted to discount the square footage a bit. And we've also added mini storage. There's almost 700,000 square feet of mini storage in the city. So that gives you an idea of what a square footage tax may look like. And again, these are the slides. These next 3 or 4 slides here show the cities that do, or 3 slides. And the do levy a B&O tax with all the detail. And you will note there's some in here, like Seattle, they're over the 0.2%, and they're asked, can more grant applies to heavy manufacturing only? So it depends on how your licensing is structured in the city on how you would apply the gross receipts tax. There was a ask at the last study session, what about park impact fee history, capital uses per the Growth Management Act. And this is a summary of that chart. At the end of 2018, there's about $5.6 million. You can see the expenses as well as the interest that's been accrued and the revenues. 2016 was a big year for permit activity. And these are charged against the building permits that are taken out. And that is what I have for presentation for you this evening.
Questions from council? Yes, Councilmember Baggett.
Shelley, just briefly, if you put a B&O tax on warehousing, manufacturing, and what have you, would it all have to be the same percentage? Could they vary?
You could break it out from manufacturing to wholesale to distribution. It depends on how refined we can get our licensing system, but if we have licensing that is for distribution, warehousing, wholesaling, manufacturing, we can categorize that and create a category.
So they don't have to be the same, right? Okay.
No, you can have services, you can have professional office, you can have retail.
Yeah, I was looking at the chart where we talked about the other cities, and it looks like they're kind of uniform across for all of them.
Yeah, these are on gross receipts here.
But it could be different for us if we
It could
decided
be.
that was a better way to go. Thank you.
Other questions? Deputy Mayor Pelosi.
Thank you, Mayor. Shelley, of the 44 cities, could you provide us the list of those cities?
They're on
listed.
slide-
Majority of them are
excuse
listed.
me.
26, 27, and 28.
So all of those listed on these several are the 44?
And these are all on gross receipts. This does not show those that have head tax or square footage.
Okay.
Bellevue has something different. There's a handful of cities, maybe 10, that have ordinances that have a taxing structure that falls out. This is the standard off-the-shelf, tax structure that you see. Manufacturing, retail, services, wholesale. That's the standard one. However, there's some cities like Kent and Bellevue and some others, I'd have to look at them, that have done something a little bit differently. One of the things, like warehousing, has, if any, gross receipts. They just don't have it because they're storing and they really don't have something they're billing out. It's kind of a cost of their doing business. So a square footage tax would work well with those types of activities.
Can I ask another question, Mayor?
Yes.
I may have missed it, okay? This is a lot of stuff, even if you look at it
I know.
times.
Yes. I lost my chain of thought. It's okay. You'll think of it in a moment.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
So more just comments instead of questions now as we look at this again and keep trying to digest everything we have here, because in our other meeting, we went through this again, and as I've mentioned before, when we look at the numbers as we go from 2021 to 2024, it's just staggering. I mean, it's a tremendous jump in the negative over that 4-year period. And I think as a council, our first priority is to figure out what we do in 2021 and then go from there. Even if we look at the various potential opportunities here that we have for increasing revenues, we could still have quite a shortfall as we go forward. So it's not an easy solution here at all. And there's two things that are not factored into this yet. One is our continued growth as a city, which is going to mean more demand on services, which could mean more staff needed and other types of expenditures for that. Secondly, if a recession hits again. So we have those two other things we have to consider as we go forward with this, looking at how we somewhat attack this situation. As I keep looking at this, as I keep going through this, it becomes so perplexing at times because the numbers are so large. And how do we get to where we need to get in such a short period of time on that? B&O tax has a positive context and a negative context to it. But as a city as we are, and as we are growing, and as the needs continue to grow, those are the types of things I think we need to seriously consider at this point in time in order for us to at least put a dent in where we are and where we need to go. And then look at the other options as we can make up some of that difference as well. But the old song by Jerry Reed, a long way to go and a short time to get there. And I think that's where we're at right now. We have a long way to go, but a very short time to get there. And as we all are concerned with this, for me, I think looking at some essence of a B&O tax to begin with may be some sort of a initial solution to get us where we need to be in the short term.
Deputy Mayor Pelosi.
So we talked, our last meeting that we had, we talked about mini storage, large warehousing. So how, do any of these charts break that down?
Let's see, it does. Slide 25.
Okay. Okay. Square foot, okay.
I think it's 24 in our packet.
Oh, it is, okay, because I put
Because
another
of that
slide in here.
extra slide.
Right, I put another slide in, I'm sorry.
Slide 24.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it.
I'm gonna guess it's on that side, yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks, Mayor. Okay, square footage. So, I guess what I'm grappling with in my head is how many mini and larger warehouses, what type of opportunities do we have?
You know, mini storages are pretty easy to count. I imagine there's 7 or 8 or 9 maybe in the city, thereabouts. Warehousing, I have a square footage. I don't know how many we have.
It would also depend on whether you were going to put a threshold on what size, what square footage.
Right.
If it was below a certain square footage, would it be exempt?
What a lot of cities do, like on the gross receipts, let's take Renton, for example. Whoops. Renton has a $500,000 threshold. So any business that grosses less than $500,000 a year, they pay no B&O tax. Kent's is a little bit lower than that. Slide. And Renton, yeah, 500,000. On this final column over here, that shows what their threshold is. Renton's 500, Tacoma's 250. Kent is 250. Mercer Island's 150. Kind of gives you an idea. So any, let's see, and Everson is $1 million. So there, my guess is there's one business in Everson probably that that makes over the $1 million. I'm not that familiar with the city of Everson, and I imagine it's a manufacturing and wholesale type operation.
Councilmember Holman.
As a matter of principle, I've always been opposed to a city adding a B&O tax because it serves as a disincentive to businesses that come in and employ our people. The fact that we haven't had a city B&O, and I distinguish that because there is a state B&O tax. This is a increase over that by this. But anyway, we have actually gotten at least one business where the CEO has told me that he relocated from one of our neighboring cities to us simply because we didn't have a B&O. Used it as it came time for him to relocate, get more space. There were other reasons, but he listed right up there as the fact that we didn't have a B&O tax. The other thing is we have a budgetary shortfall coming up, very evident. And I think it behooves us as a city council to start involving the citizens in making that decision, rather than a councilmatic decision, like a B&O tax. I think getting citizens involved and voting to continue the types of services that we have become accustomed that we need to build the case for that. And a levy lift would be that. I appreciate the article in a previous Auburn Reporter by Robert Whale, kind of explaining the financial dilemma that we are heading to. We need to do that more. We need to start increasing the financial education and literacy of our citizens and have them assist in making that decision. And because there's only two blunt tools we have to work with: get more money or cut services, or a combination. I've said that before. And before I start raising taxes on people, I really would like to get citizen involvement. And I'd be reticent to do a councilmatic B&O tax, my personal feeling, without getting citizen input on the levy lift.
And remember that the Chamber of Commerce will be involved in discussions with you as council on any B&O discussions that you might have, since it would impact the businesses. Not the residents so much, unless you're a resident business owner, but the businesses in our city. City Attorney Gross.
Just one point of clarification for the council. If we impose a business and occupation tax based on gross receipts, that is subject to referendum under state law. Yes. So while it may not be something that the citizens would actually vote on here, if council imposed a gross receipts tax, state law does provide for that to go to the public as a referendum.
Councilmember Baggett?
Just a question, Councilmember Holman. Would you consider getting the public opinion in here in the form of public hearings, for example, before we made a councilmatic type vote? Or how would you think we could get the public involved in this process?
I think that we have on staff people that are public relations, public information experts. I don't know the best way to do it. I am of a generation that reads a newspaper, and you know, I open up the newspaper and see what Robert Whale said I said.
The power, Robert, the power.
Well, the reason I asked that question, I didn't expect a firm answer at the end, but I would think that perhaps the people that would be more interested in this would be the business people rather than the general public, even though it could indirectly affect them to some degree.
If I may, it depends on whose ox you're going to gore. If it's a B&O, the business people are going to be involved, but it does affect our citizenry in the fact of, if you're paying a B&O tax, that's less money you have to grow your business with and hire more people. If we're looking at a levy lift, then that involves any property owner and indirectly people living in apartments. There's no free lunch. It's going to get passed on. And it's not just about increasing revenue. We have to look at the painful side of what decreasing services looks like. Remember the complaints that we got about grocery store parking lots and the transient behavior, which was solved by putting bicycle officers, 6 new, was it 6?
Well, no, there were not 6 new bicycle officers.
6.
With the approval by council of the cable tax, 6%, 5% increase in cable tax to 6%, that is dedicated funding that we were able to hire 6 new police officers and sustain their wages.
But, and it's not just about single issues. Oh, why we should cut help to the homeless. Well, that runs against my conscience to start with, but the other thing that I'm hearing is now that we have a day shelter, a lot of the vagrant behaviors that were offensive to people in our downtown have lessened as people go into the day shelter and have something else to do. And I'm getting people telling me that it's getting to be nicer to go shopping in Auburn. All those things have, all those reductions that we could possibly be forced into making have consequences. And I think rather than taking it all on our own shoulders, we need to invite our citizenry and our business owners to lend us a hand, lend us a little bit of their shoulders. And what sort of city do you want to live in, and how much is it going to cost? We have to be great stewards of that money, but managing it as frugally as Shelley does. Thank you very much. I appreciate conservative estimates. The bottom line is we're coming into a period of some large red ink, and doing nothing is the wrong decision to make. And I think the right decision is to invite our citizenry to join us in making that decision.
Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
Shelley, if you know, how many of these cities went to their citizens for a vote, or did they automatically get a B&O council chose to do a B&O tax?
Well, it wouldn't be voted. It's council that enacts it. And I don't believe, most of them did not. There may be a couple that did, but I feel pretty comfortable saying that most did not.
And your sheets don't have anything to do with councilmanic, or I mean, non-councilmanic, where they had to go for a vote of the public, other than what you showed with V's and C's on it.
And what they did, let's talk about Renton. They had some open houses. You know, they had proposed this tax. They had some open houses where people could come in and they could talk about it. And I don't know if they did that before or after they passed the legislation, but there was outreach in that respect for the B&O. They did not go out and get a vote. This does, as Councilmember Holman says, this does impact the businesses, not so much the citizen, whereas a levy lift would be on property taxes, and it would impact both business on their business properties and residential citizens and people living in apartments, as those costs do get passed through, or multifamily housing.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
So, Councilmember Holman, I do not disagree with you. I am not a proponent of, continuously increasing taxes, and looking at that as a only option to go where we need to go. And I do believe that, yes, we need citizenry involvement. No matter what we do, it does impact citizens. Even a B&O tax will impact citizens, because ultimately a business is going to pass that cost down, and it's going to cost people more. Although it's a small amount, it's still going to cost them more to do what they need to do with those particular businesses. The incentives for businesses is something that we continuously need to look at. We want more business in our community. We want the right businesses in our community to serve the needs of people. But we have a fine line here of how we balance our huge shortfall as we go forward in the future. And definitely, I think I agree. Yes, agree. We definitely need citizenry involvement, business involvement, like we will have, to give us some input as to how they see this unfolding for them and the impact it has on them overall. As we continue to look at how we attack this, we are one council, I believe, that does not bury our heads in the sand and let this go by. We are doing this very proactively right now. We may be just a little bit behind in this, but we need to catch up very quickly. But we don't want to take ourselves or future councils to the year 2024 and automatically have to say we have to start laying off a bunch of people. We can't provide services for our citizens. Can't plow the roads in the wintertime if it snows. Sorry, can't do all that stuff. We just really need to have this done in a very quick manner of how we're going to identify this, and I'm not quite sure how quickly we can get citizens on board. I know staff will be able to provide us something on what that means, but we definitely need to get our citizens involved now so we can get input from them now to continue this on again in the short term. It's very concerning. It will continue to be concerning, and I just am kind of lost as far as what direction we actually do take and how we get there. But I just know that in any sense, no matter what we do, it impacts people, and we are in the people business.
I wanted to respond to the question regarding if any of these are voted. And the City of Seattle tax is voted where it went above the 0.2%. So they had the 0.2 in place. There was a vote to increase above the statutory limit. City of Seattle is the only city that I see on this list of cities that has a voting.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Shelley, what does the
Your microphone, please.
What does the E stand for on some of these cities?
Your microphone still isn't on, but it's right down below
Okay.
their E rate higher than statutory limit. It's the second line down below.
Okay,
the-
I see it. All right, thank you very much.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
And I was gonna, like I'm not sure it was Mr. Baggett or Mr. DeCoursey asked about the different, like the manufacturer and the retails, and you can pick different amount of money.
A different rate.
A different rate, and how do we do that? From what pocket do we get those from?
Well, what?
Well, you know.
Well, it's a percentage rate that's applied against the gross receipts, and it go based upon how they're licensed in the city, or what type of entity they are. And they would be required to report. There would be a component of the website that would be dedicated to this. And, there's a whole process that needs to go in place. So there have to be some staff hired to manage this and to answer people's calls when they come in to administer this program. And this the outreach and making sure that everybody who has a business license in the city is reporting.
Thank you.
Other questions for Shelley? We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left before we need to come to a conclusion on this meeting, just so we can be ready for the 7 p.m. regularly scheduled council meeting. So we do have another meeting scheduled. Is it in 2 weeks, I believe?
Next week.
So what types of information do you want Shelley to bring back that she and her team can be working on? Is there anything at this point that you are looking for this next meeting? Councilmember Holman.
This would not necessarily be a task for Finance Director Coleman, but perhaps a task for our Public Information Department. How best do we involve the public? People have different learning styles. My generation reads it in a newspaper. My daughter-in-law probably reads it on her cell phone. But some people respond well to public meetings where we have the little voting device, handheld voting devices. I'd like to hear from our media people on how best do we engage our community. Some outreach proposals. How do we, because people are busy raising families and working, and we're going to have to make this come to them. And I don't have the background or expertise. When I was talking to the public, I generally had their full attention.
That's in your former life as a police officer. Let's just make sure that we. Other ideas, other requests? It'll be a really short meeting if that's all it is. Deputy Mayor Pelosa.
I'd like to, Shelley, I'd like to see the major funding elements, you know, like B&O, the warehouse. I think we need something. Take 3 or 4 revenue elements and just take them from A to Z. And how much would they bring in annually?
When you say take them from A to Z,
Well,
Deputy
you're
Mayor,
gonna-
what do you mean?
Making some assumptions.
Are you saying identify 2 or 3 specific businesses? I don't think we have clarity on what you're asking.
Like B&O. Applying B&O in the city of Auburn, how much annually would that bring us? But then I know you're gonna,
Right there.
5 million?
I could break it out amongst sector.
Well, no, if this is your estimate, then fine.
I think I had one, it's like 5 or 6 mil, 5 point something million, it's on here somewhere.
Trying not to leave anything on the table to capture all of the revenue elements that we can. The B&O, you got it here, $5 million.
You want levy lift estimates?
Yeah,
Okay.
like, and your utilities, that's another example.
Okay, I think the utilities were in there as well. All of that information is
But if we
in
could,
this packet.
if we could encapsulate all of that data on one chart,
Okay.
so that then I think, then we're narrowing it down to all of our discussions here. Bob?
Councilmember Holman?
Like I've said earlier, you increase revenue, or you decrease services. And I leave this up to the administration, but would it be premature to have some estimates on if you were forced to decrease your budget, what would it look like to the various select department heads? For instance, one of our largest expenditures is in police department. So department head, chief of police, what would a budget cut do to your department? We have to look at what the painful side is also.
Right, so.
But I leave that up to the administration.
Well, so here's the thing, similar to when you had your transportation ad hoc committee. You know, there were comments of trim your budgets, tell us what you can trim your budgets. The issue is council has to prioritize what those reductions would be. It's not a matter of our directors going over and saying, okay, a 10% decrease to my budget means that, let's say for police, I'm not going to have bicycle officers anymore, because Chief Pearson doesn't know what your priorities are, right? If Chief comes back and says, I'm reducing our bicycle officers, and you go, no, I don't want our bicycle officers cut. What about canine? Or what about you only have 6 officers on the street at any given time instead of 6 plus a sergeant? So there have to be discussions by this council on what your priorities are if you're going to ask our directors to look at this and reduce their budgets or give you an estimate of a budget reduction. Yes.
I'm not looking for that fine of a comb. This isn't budget casting. This would be if we were forced to maintain a revenue stream that we have right now, and in 2022 you had X percentage of money to deal with, what's that going to affect? Now then, 80% of a police department's budget is personnel. So how many personnel, how many fewer police officers are you going to be working the street with your budget? How many fewer IT? You know, we need to look at what the painful side is. And that's a frightening forecast. King County did it a few years ago when they were talking about which roads they were going to let go to gravel. And that's what I'm looking for.
Well, I will tell you that theirs was more for show than anything else. It was the shock factor. It was no more Guardian 1, right? It was no more King County Sheriff would ground their helicopter. It was letting the roads go to gravel. That was more for shock factor for the community for a vote, for a tax increase.
We're looking to do that.
Well, okay, I still think it's going to be difficult for our directors to do anything other than tell you how many people that would be as a reduction if each of their departments had a 10% reduction in budget, and that isn't going to necessarily be what that would be, right? It would be up to council to say, I want you to cut this program. Well, that would be X many dollars plus X many employees. So it's not going to be an easy thing for our directors to do. We can talk about it and see what we can do, but I can't promise you that we're going to come back with something to where you have this hard facts of, okay, well, in the city attorney's office, we're going to not have an assistant city clerk. It's just not going to be that clear cut. Was it you or was it Bob that had Councilmember?
Well, you know, we're all going to have to come up with a mix of different things. And I think that, you know, logically speaking, we're going to have to not only talk to the directors, we're also going to talk to, finance is going to have to come up with some options for us. Now, we're looking at B&O tax, we're looking at cutting services perhaps, but we're also looking at maybe there's a bond issue or something like that we can float. There's only so many limitations we have, but there's so many variables here in this B&O tax thing that we could take a little bit of each, do a little thing, do a little balance here, knowing, number one, how much of a shortfall we're looking at in each one of these out years, and attacking each one of those methodically, coming up with some options, and those are the kind of options that we need to present to the public, I believe. And how we do that would be like an open house, it could be a public hearing, could be any number of ways. I know I've been out there on Facebook telling everybody about this meeting tonight and letting them know from my constituents out there that if you want to come in and attend these meetings and learn what's going on and what we're looking at here in the next 4 or 5 years, and it may go out beyond that eventually, but let's get a mix together of something and that we can at least deal with some options. That's my only thought.
Okay. Councilmember DeCoursey, and then we're going to have to.
Yeah, I know we're very short time. Thank you, Mayor. I think the mayor makes a very good point when she mentions council priorities. I think our homework assignment is each one of us needs to identify what our priorities are and bring that back to this meeting. If I go back again and look at 2024, we're looking at $30.6 million in a shortfall. So we are the ones who are going to have to say, your $35 million in 2024 police department is going to be $24 million. We've got to identify our priorities. And secondly, how that impacts the city and the people that live within the city and the people who do business in the city. So I think that's our first order of business is we identify our priorities.
Right, and that's not just by department, but just overall philosophy of the city. Take your budget books, take your revenue manuals, look at all of the, look at the comp plan, look to see what you have identified as your priorities and the values that the city has put in place that you approved as part of the comp plan. So there's a lot of homework to be done on both sides. Okay, so with that, I will close this meeting, and we need a couple minutes for our